So if oxygen is not available, we can't use cellular respiration and the mitochondria because remember, oxygen is the final electron acceptor at the end of the electron transport chain. So cells need to be able to still make ATP because we still need energy to do work in the cell. So we do have an alternative way to make ATP when oxygen is not available. So that process is called fermentation. So let's take a look at what we do in fermentation. So here's just a picture, just showing you that when oxygen is available, we'll use our mitochondria and do cellular respiration because we can make a lot more ATP that way. But if oxygen is not available, our cells can do fermentation instead. And what we do in fermentation is our cells are only able to do glycolysis. So just that first step of cellular respiration, that's all that's being done in fermentation. So that's it. So we just split glucose in half and we only end up making 2 ATP, which is actually not very much. So what we do in our cells is lactic acid fermentation. So if you're lifting weights or sprinting, you're contracting your muscles so hard and so fast that you can't get enough blood to those muscles quickly enough that the muscle cells actually run out of oxygen. So they can't use their mitochondria to do cellular respiration to produce ATP. So they switch over and those muscle cells will use fermentation to make ATP. So they're just doing glycolysis, that first step of cellular respiration out in the cytoplasm, because they can't use their mitochondria at all because there's no oxygen. So they just split glucose in half and they make their 2 ATP. And in the process of splitting glucose in half, they do rip some electrons off of it. And they fill up the electron carrier, the NAD+, to make the NADH, our full dump truck here. And normally these electron carriers would take those electrons and dump the electrons off at the electron transport chain in the mitochondria. But we don't have any oxygen available, so the electron transport chain and the mitochondria are shut down. So we need to dump our electrons somewhere. So we actually dump them onto pyruvate, and that's where the lactic acid comes from. So that's what we end up doing in our muscles when we're sprinting or lifting weights. Our muscles will do fermentation. And because we're not making a lot of ATP, you can see why we can't lift weights or sprint for very long because we just don't make enough ATP to sustain those activities for very long periods of time. And there's other forms of fermentation as well that other organisms will do. So these are some yeast. These are eukaryotic microorganisms, and we actually use yeast to make beer and wine, and we also will use yeast to bake bread with. And what they do is alcohol fermentation. So they just do one extra step from what we do in our lactic acid fermentation. So they just do glycolysis. They split the glucose in half to make the 2 pyruvate molecules, and then they just do one extra step. So they just chop off a carbon from the pyruvate, make carbon dioxide gas, and then they're going to dump the electrons onto this molecule that's left, and that will make the ethanol or the alcohol. And that's what we want when we're making beer and wine. But if you're baking bread, you have the yeast do fermentation while you're getting the bread to rise, and the fermentation process will produce the carbon dioxide gas, and that's actually what makes the dough rise. And so that's the product that you want when you're baking bread.